Misogyny. Misogyny is the hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women or girls. It enforces sexism by punishing those who reject an inferior status for women and rewarding those who accept it. Misogyny manifests in numerous ways, including sexual exclusion, sex discrimination, hostility, androcentrism, patriarchy, male privilege, belittling of women, disenfranchisement of women, violence against women, and sexual objectification. Hello everybody, welcome to Tuesday's episode of the Toy Talks podcast. We're calling this episode Casualty of War. Yes, because I definitely feel at work it is kind of feeling, it kind of feels very tense. And Gary is the gift that keeps on giving, and we're going to talk about his escapades in the last week. And I kind of wanted to share the learning lessons because I think it's really, really important for this episode. I also want to check in on you guys, make sure you're doing well. It's Tuesday. I know I've had a really strenuous Monday and I'm really, really exhausted. And you guys almost didn't have an episode today because my equipment, I don't know what was going on. I tried everything for 10 minutes to get it to work. And I definitely know it's the devil. And the Lord said, oh, no. Toy is going to produce an episode today. So that's what you have, a brand new episode of the Toy Talks podcast. And I see it as a blessing each week that I'm able to deliver you an episode that is changing the lives of Black women, how we navigate work. As you guys know already, the Toy Talks podcast advises, guides and assists Black women how to navigate the world of work safely and in turn highlight the path of success, because success is attainable for us. It's about us understanding the white constructs that seek to continue to oppress us and keep us in a box. And we are breaking free from that box, and we're using the tools, the examples and the pearls of wisdom I drop every week here on the Toy Talks platform to be able to navigate safely. I am a successful Black woman, but it hasn't been without its scrapes, and it's a lot. And even now at the height of my career, navigating the world of work has been, honestly, I wouldn't even say challenging. I just would say really complex, because I've worked with some of the most horrible people. I've worked with the nicest people and those in between. But in my current workplace, I don't understand why people who are brought in as consultants are battling for a position that doesn't exist. I just don't understand. And even if it does exist, I don't understand people's desperation to be the second in command. And I think the prize is obviously them toppling my boss and them ultimately being in control. I think for Gary, I think it's because his colonial ancestors, obviously, he has that in his blood, the takeover spirit that continues to dominate him, but he falls flat on his face every time. And some of the others in my team, I just think to myself, for me, I feel so lucky to be able to solely 100% work from home and be effective. And off the basis of that, I definitely consider myself a remote worker, or my CV is remote worker. And I don't actually see myself ever going to an office again. I think obviously they will have to be considerations, I think maybe once a month. But even if I didn't agree to that, I think I could get away with it, simply because I don't necessarily have a client-facing type of role. And equally, I feel like I've climbed up the ranks enough and I'm effective enough within my career that I can do it from anywhere in the world. I don't actually have to be in London. You know, the company I work for could be in London, but I physically don't have to be. And also I mentioned a few weeks ago that I'm definitely at a crossroads in my career and there's a lot to consider. And later on in the year, I will elaborate a lot more on what that crossroads looks like, especially for Black women. I think our crossroads are different. Yeah, because we do not have the advantages of white women or of white men. And we have to overachieve to even be in a position where we can attain certain jobs. And even in that overachievement, we're still having to navigate in a way that is strategic, because ultimately as Black women we never get what we deserve unless we make sure that we are overachievers, are subject matter experts, and are a safe pair of hands to be able to attain the success that is ultimately deserving of us. We deserve success, and I will bash on and bang on about this until kingdom come. Success is what you define success to be. I know for me what success means, and for me, you know, if I was to elaborate on what that means, it's to do with the position, the money, the influence, and ultimately how I'm able to pivot and navigate the world of work. That's success. And I'm able to do those things relatively with ease. But in this particular organisation I'm working with, it hasn't come without its challenges, simply because it's very male, white dominated. And it's male, white dominated, it's remote. And at the same time, the type of projects I'm on are very... you know, from a senior level perspective, like it's high visibility. So a lot of the senior bosses, their eyes are watching. I'm very, very lucky to have, and I say lucky, but I would say strategically smart to have developed and, you know, been able to continue to develop great relationships in the workplace, in relationships of influence. Yeah. And in turn, I've garnered the respect of people. And that has been my secret weapon. So listen, let's get into it. So you guys know Gary. I've spoken about Gary before. If you're new to the Toy Talks podcast, please familiarise yourself with the episodes. And in relation to this episode, I'd say the last couple of episodes. Gary is a white, privileged man who thinks he's better than, doesn't have to work hard for anything, because he's just, you know, found himself in this role purely because he's used his all access passport of being a white man. He looks like he stinks of piss. Yes, he does. He looks very unclean. Like I literally, when we're in like team calls, I literally don't even realise, but I unconsciously go and get the antibac and spray my hands, and I sometimes will just spray the air because I just feel like I could smell him. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know I'm OCD, but just trust me. And I think also as well with Gary, he doesn't have shame. He doesn't have shame in what he does, and he is emotionally led, and that's why he continues to make some errors that has come to, it's going to come to haunt him. It literally is. And I always say to people, when you do things with clean hands and a clean mind, karma will always reward those who do not. Those who are clean-hearted, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of anything else, just clean-hearted, good things will always come your way, because that's what you've put into the world. And I live my life like that. Like I can't stand Gary. I don't like him, but I don't play dirty. I play clean. He plays dirty. And the thing is with people that play dirty, they always get their comeuppance. Gary's meeting his. He's meeting his Avenger. So Gary, where do I start? Okay, so he decided to take a week off work. Now, on my particular project, it's very rare for anyone to take a week off. It's odd, right? Because it's high intensity and very, very demanding. It's not to say that you can't, it just is odd. And when Gary took a week off, I immediately knew why. So within my organisation, of course, I'm a contractor. There have been some perm roles advertised. And there's like a whole interview process, because the next level up is like, I'd say one role away. Well, let's call it, I don't know how to explain it. I'm senior, so the next one up would be like head of department, if you like. Maybe that's kind of a better way to explain it. And the roles came out, and I knew for a fact that Gary applied. I knew for a fact. And it was confirmed last week that he had applied for it and been shortlisted, which, to be honest with you, I couldn't have been more shocked. But I can only assume that he was shortlisted because he already works here. So there is that preferential treatment if you're already working in an organisation. There's things that are a given, right? They think, okay, you know the organisation, you know the structure, you know the projects, but the actual doing of the job, Gary does not know how to do the job. He is not a commercial contract manager or commercial contract lead. He is a procurement person. I wouldn't even go as far as to say he is an expert or is learned. I think that he just does the bare minimum and is able just to get away with doing nothing because he is a privileged white man. He's a privileged white coward is what he is, because a man will still stand up and be counted, and I don't even credit him with any type of humanity because he's a deplorable human being. And some of you may be thinking, but Toya, that's a bit harsh. Well, listen to this. So there is another guy called Gary that works in the team, but in order for us to not get confused, I'm going to call that guy Ian. So for some reason, Ian has always had like this attitude, and his attitude is what has been one of, oh, as a commercial contract manager, you're supposed to be doing this, this and this, but he's never ever actually held the position of a commercial contract manager. He's one of those people that sticks his nose up in the air, and in team meetings he says things and you just think to yourself, you do not do the job I do. But what he does do is kind of like governance and making sure that we're like adhering to certain rules and that we have governance processes within the organisation. And it's, the governance side of things is equally as important, right? It is the kind of bedrock in which we are able to do our commercial contract management. Anyway, I remember back last year, Ian was very, I don't know, he wanted to know my background, and he put a meeting in my diary. I just felt like he was team too much, but I thought, do you know what? I don't mind if he wants to know a bit about my background, because I think in his questioning, I'll learn more about him than he learns about me. And that was the case. I learned that he's from like a certain industry that has nothing to do with what we're doing. But equally as well, he thinks that he has the credentials to be a commercial contract manager. But just by talking to him, I know he's not. Anyway, Gary seems to have taken Ian under his wing. And as such, Ian doesn't really talk to any of the contract managers. The only time he talks to us is during team meetings when he's making suggestions that are bullshit. And I don't just think that, the entire team does, because whenever Ian talks, everyone rolls their eyes. And for the most part, I keep my camera off because you can see my reactions in my face. Anyway, so Gary decided he was going to take a week off work. And for some reason, well, I can't even say for some reason, I think Gary is sexist and I think he's racist. That's what I think. And people say, oh, that's really strong. I don't care, because it's the truth. My boss is a mixed race woman. And she presents as black. She's black passing, but I can tell that she's mixed race. And most of the people on our team, so I'm not talking about the division here, I mean the team, we're more black, or I hate the word ethnic minorities, but you guys know what I mean. There's not a lot of white people on the team. It's like a handful. So the white people are in the minority, actually. And Gary goes out of his way to cut my boss out. Anytime there's escalations or serious things that he should be making her aware and putting on her radar, he deliberately doesn't. He's very demeaning of her, so he talks quite badly about her. He's tried to do that in front of me and I've had to put him in his place a couple of times. I know for a fact that he goes to different parts of the business and talks quite badly of my boss. Caroline, who's a relatively new starter to the team, approached me about something Gary had said about my boss, and I had to kind of like nip it in the bud with her, but he was very disparaging about my boss. And my thing is, even if you don't like my boss, at least have some self-control in it. If you're going to bitch to like people who won't say anything, but it's like he wants it to get back to her. And the only thing I can think of that he has a problem with that is because she's a woman and she's black, and he doesn't like the idea of a woman telling him what to do, because there's 5 black women that sit in the organisation that I know of, me included, that he's had issues with. And I've told you guys about that time when he had an issue with me because Caroline had started and I delegated her some work, and he said that I should have run it past him. And I asked him, why should I be running it past you? You're not my manager. You are not my boss. And he says, yeah, but you've gone to speak to Deborah, so why couldn't you speak to me? I said, but why should I speak to you? He goes, I thought we were colleagues. I said, so is everybody else. So he has this entitlement attitude. And honestly, I was shocked. I didn't know where it came from. And I did share with you how he sent me these really like aggressively rude messages on Teams, and I just screenshot everything and put in a folder, because I'm now showing a pattern of his propensity to be aggressive. And to be honest, it is misogyny and it is rooted in patriarchy. And I've got my evidence when it comes to Gary. But my thing has always been with Gary is he's going to be his own undoing. I've shared with you guys how he's tried to set me up with my contracts and how he's done underhanded things that I found out about. And my boss on many occasions has had to put him in his place because it was so out of order. He actually compromised her job on one of the escalations because if it had gone tits up, my boss would have been on the chopping block for it because it was serious. And he knows the gravity, and it's because he knows the gravity, he's willing to set anybody up so that he can make himself look better. But the point is, he can't even do the job that he has been employed to do, he can't even do. Anyway, so the week that he was supposed to take off, anytime we have a team meeting, you can tell that Gary uses Ian to do his dirty work. It's really obvious. And Ian only has aligned himself with Gary. He doesn't really align himself with anyone else in the team. He's isolated himself. And actually, Gary's enabled that isolation. So when Gary took his week off, a couple of days before, ordinarily if you're taking time off, you let my boss know, right? And depending on how long you're taking off, you'll have to do like some type of a handover or something, or just let my boss know what the critical things are, and also agree with her who you'd put in your out of office, right? That's a standard. I mean, I took 2 days off and I put some time in my boss's diary, and I just said, these are 2 things that are major. Who would you like me to put, on my out of office? And also as well, it's giving my boss that respect. Even if my boss is the worst boss in the world, she's still my boss. And for me, there's a level of respect that I always give my bosses. Whether I think they should be in the job, whether I think they're competent or not, the fact is, that is their position, right? Someone ordained for them to be a manager. And there has to be a level of respect that you apportion to their position. And if you are able to do that, one day when you're a manager, you would expect people to give you that same respect. So you have to sow those seeds. That's how I look at it. Do you know that Gary took it upon himself to start doing a handover for Ian? So when my boss realised that Gary was taking a week off, she called me and she said, I know Caroline is working on some stuff for you, but do you mind if for a week I have her covering Gary's work? Would that be, would that leave too much of a hole in terms of, or a gap in kind of the stuff she helps you with? So I was like, no, it's fine. It's a week. I'm all right with that. Little did we know that Gary had briefed Ian, but he didn't realise that my boss he didn't realise that my boss had figured out that he had told Ian that Ian will be doing the cover, but that wasn't agreed with my boss. Long story short, my boss set up a call with Gary and said, listen, you need to give a handover to Caroline. And he was like, well, I started giving one to Ian. And my boss was like, well, who told you to do that? Every single week we have a team meeting. Ian is and I wouldn't even call it confrontational, but he doesn't read the room. And part of that is because Gary's been sowing seeds into Ian's head. And you can tell because fundamentally, Ian's not a bad person. Personally, for me, I think Ian is kind of okay. He's good at what he does, and what he does is governance. Anything over and above that, I think that he struggles. But you get people like that, right, where they're good at what they're good at. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge what people are good at, and you centre what they're good at and see the value in it and in what it can give you, right? So this had been going on for weeks, where every team meeting would be slightly heated, it'd be slightly uncomfortable. You can tell like the rest of us contract managers are thinking like, have we missed something here? Gary would get Ian to do certain things and you just think, why is Ian doing that? Long story short, Ian had decided that he wants to do contract management. So guess who he thought was the right person to give him that training? Gary. Gary, who has no contract management experience, that has just privileged his way to the role. So Ian set up a call with my boss and says, my contract's coming to an end, and I just wanted to know if you were going to renew it because, Gary has trained me up in contract management and I'm kind of ready to take on some contract management experience. And my boss said no. And he said, pardon? And my boss said no. Your contract comes to an end at the end of the month and I'm not renewing it. 2 days later, we had a team meeting and my boss is announcing in that team meeting that we have a lot of vacancies within our team. And she said, if you know anyone or you can recommend anyone or within the industry that could do XYZ roles where I want to recruit, I would, give favour, if you like, to anyone that you refer, and rather than kind of go through any type of test or whatever, I'll just interview them. So rather than a 2-stage interview, they'd probably just get one. And if you saw Gary and Ian's face, do you know what I learned in that moment? I didn't learn it because it reaffirmed it because I already knew it. People can use you to fight their battles, but when it's time to head to the trenches, that person that's trying to use you as a pawn will just leave you there. Ian is a casualty of this ongoing battle that Gary has with every black woman or every woman in the team, including my boss. Now, personally, Ian should have aligned himself with every one of us commercial contract leads, because we, as the leads, all have influence. I have influence, a couple of my team members, we all have a lot of influence. In so much as, if he had aligned himself, I would have taken it upon myself to go to my boss and say, listen, Ian's done really well here. I know his contract's up at the end of the month, but I actually really need him on my project. I can't imagine him not being here. He has all the knowledge and he's done all this stuff and actually added a lot of value. And that would have carried more weight. And that would have carried weight because I've aligned myself at work with the right people, my manager being one of them. I give my manager the respect. And if I have, listen, there's times I don't agree with my manager. But what I do not do is embarrass her in an audience of my peers. I afford her that respect as my manager, that even in meetings when she asks me questions, I'm very PC about my answer. Very PC. And if there's something I have to take offline, like for instance, was in a team meeting a few weeks ago, and she'd asked me something about my contract and she had an opinion and I didn't agree with her opinion, and I said, I see where you're coming from and I actually agree with you on that in that regard, but there are a few things I do need to take offline because I'd love to get your guidance. You saw her shoulders stand into attention because for her it's like, oh, look at the respect that she's given. And sometimes you have to play to people's egos. You have to play to people's egos and play the long game to get what you want. Because now I'm in a situation where I was supposed to, remember, I'd already resigned in December. I'm in a position where I rescinded my resignation, negotiated a higher rate. If I want to take a month off work, my boss isn't flinching. Do you understand? I'm not saying that everybody's boss is easy. I know that there are some dragons out there. But there does come a point where you've got to understand everybody you work with is a human being just like you. They cut and bleed, cry just like you. But you have to align yourself with the right people. Who has influence? Allegiances and alliances. I have an episode called Allegiances and Alliances. Go ahead and have a listen to that. Because it feeds into what I'm saying to you. And in order to read the room, you have to be silent to read. I.e., sometimes you've got to take a step back. Listen, nobody gave me a blueprint of the people I was going to work with and my manager. If you guys remember earlier on in the episodes of the Toy Talks podcast, I told you my first interaction with my boss is she sent a really, really rude message to me. And these are her words. But she didn't realise that she had jumped the gun. I hadn't met her before. It was my first day at work. And I have, till this day, not opened that email. I haven't opened that email. Long story short, She forgot that I'd started. I sent an email just to tell her I'd started, and she sent me an email that was supposed to be for another member of staff who has since left, but accidentally sent it to me, and it was about me. So in the meeting where I met her for the first time, hi, I'm so-and-so, because she didn't interview me. Hi, I'm so-and-so. She confessed to sending an email to me that was for somebody else, and she asked me if I'd opened it, and I said no. Till this day I'm talking to you, I've kept that email in a folder. I haven't opened it. Now, if I had opened it, it would have skewed the way I looked at her. God knows what she'd written there, so much so that she had to confess it to me. I don't feel the need to open it. And sometimes you've got to understand that winning the battle is short term. Sometimes it's about the war. And I say to people all the time, it's the long game. Sometimes you've got to just look at the bigger picture. And when I say war, I don't mean it in its actual meaning. I mean it like hypothetically. Like navigating the world of work is a jungle. In itself, jungles are exhausting. You have to be strategic. You've got to be smart. You've got to read the forest. And literally working in this place has caused me to really, really tap into every skill that I've developed in my entire career. Because I've said this before and I'll say it again. This role, this organisation, where I am working, what I am doing here is fundamentally the most challenging role of my career. Because there are so many nuances to this organisation and to this job. I'm working with people who are like the smiling assassins, and that's typical Oyibo people. Oyibo people are like that. Like the silent, they'll be stabbing you, asking you, oh, do you want 2 sugars in your tea, love? And they'll be stabbing you in the back. I'm working with people who, honestly, I know for a fact would throw me under the bus quicker than anything else, if they could, or if they thought they could. I have to constantly keep my foot in their neck and just let them know, like, I'm about it. Like, I'm not afraid to tell you what I think. If you push me hard enough, I'll professionally obliterate you. Organisations and people you work with know who they can do this shit to. They know. They know the personalities. But with me, I think they're quite conflicted because on one hand, I'm very polite, I'm very professional. I get the work done. But on the other side of it, I can be quite reserved. I can be quite introverted. And actually, they don't really know much about me. So for them, they don't necessarily know where they stand. I just know that for me, I do my job to the best of my ability. But part of doing my job has to be navigating this space. And I'm telling you now, everywhere I've worked has prepared me for this place. Honestly. I feel so bad that Ian's contract's not being renewed. It's really bothered me, and I'll tell you the reason why. Because he's just a pawn for Gary. He's a pawn in Gary's harebrained scheme to take over. That's all he is. But he didn't have the wit, and he didn't have the... I think the problem Ian had is he thinks he knows more than he does. And he failed to read the room. You only have to look at my boss's face to know when she's uncomfortable about a conversation that you're having in front of everybody. And you've got to remember, she can't get angry or lose her temper because everybody in the team is watching her at that moment. And my entire team is huge. If it's just the commercial contract managers in isolation, there's not a lot of us. But the entire team, like together in a meeting, that's quite a big team. And she knows that the spotlight is on her, and how she handles such challenges is what people are going to judge her by. She also knows that as a mixed race woman and as a woman, the nuances of navigating the world of work is not the same as it is for white women. She's very aware of it. And I think this is one of the reasons why she's very, very, very protective of me, because she understands my character enough to know that the experiences that I've experienced here, it's only been because I'm a black woman. If I was a white woman, my experiences here would be very different, because I see the experience and I witness the experience of white women, and it's nothing like this. If you think about it, in this organisation, I've had Clive try to humiliate. Well, he did. He humiliated me in front of a call of 20 people by comparing me to Gary and challenging my commercial acumen. I was defended by a senior member of staff who was on the call and defended me before I even said anything. But that experience in isolation was very uncomfortable. I'm telling you that now. I have been chastised or attempted to be chastised, and I've had to defend myself. I have been made to feel uncomfortable by Clive because I am a woman, and I know that. And I'm going to get to Clive in a minute, because Clive is one of Gary's henchmen. They every so often they kind of swap positions. Gary becomes the henchman, then Clive does, vice versa, but we'll come on to that. Ian is now at the end, going to get to the end of his contract at the end of the month, and probably doesn't have another job lined up. He's a bit older, and he did say that when you get to a certain age, he said, you know, Toya, I'm at that age. Don't ask me why he said this, right? We were having like a team meeting, but it was just the contract managers. And he says, Toya, I'm at that age where honestly, ageism is a real thing. And in my head, I thought, well, if you believe that in your mind, why are you navigating this workplace in such a way that you are antagonizing the person that potentially holds the key to extending your contract? But I think that it's this white privilege, and it's this, you know, within white privilege, it's the fact that they think that because they're white, they can do what they like. And I just don't understand it, because what world do you live in where you think you could just do what you like? Like, have your forefathers really taught you that? Like, is that where it's coming from? Is it coming from, you know, this entitlement because of your whiteness? I just don't understand how it was ever going to end well for Ian. And he has skills that are needed for the team, but my boss would rather get somebody new in, go through the process of interviewing them, get someone new in, train that person, rather than renew Ian's contract. If that is not a huge message to all of you listening to this episode, I don't know what is. You need to understand that sometimes your boss is not always the person you should align yourself with, but it shouldn't be the person you make an enemy out of either. You've got to be able to be like, okay, I'm not going to align myself with, for example, I may not align myself with my boss, but I can give the illusion that I've aligned myself with my boss. The respect you give and everything, you kind of are just professional in the way you operate. But ultimately, you know that you've aligned yourself probably with your boss's boss. But when you are working and coexisting with your direct manager, you can't be seen to be undermining them. Like, even if you want to undermine them or challenge their thought process, I don't understand why people need an audience to do that. I don't understand it. And this complicitness that white people have to humiliation of black women is really, really, really wearing thin with me now. But that's a subject for another day. So, unfortunately, Ian is a casualty of this crusade of Gary's. Also, as well, let me add that Gary is in a whole pile of shit of trouble, because he has completely isolated himself from the rest of the team. He doesn't tell my boss anything. And the week that he's been away and Caroline's been covering his work for him, she's uncovered a catastrophically amount, is that a word, of work that he hasn't done, the balls that have dropped and slipped, a lot of issues within his contract. And honestly, my boss had asked Caroline to do a forensic analysis of all of Gary's work because she has no visibility of what he does. And she uncovered some skeletons, mate. That is another episode. She's uncovered skeletons. Do you know what? I don't know why my boss hasn't sacked him yet. And I could only assume it's because she needs bums on seats. And she probably made a measured judgment between Ian and Gary and thought, right, I'll just get rid of Ian. But I wouldn't be surprised if Gary's neck is on the chopping block. That wouldn't surprise me. And remember how I started this. Gary will be his own undoing. He came for me. He came for me and he was messy about it. How is it that there's an escalation that happened on a Saturday, Gary, and Clive copied you into the email knowing full well it's to do with my contract, but deliberately didn't copy me in. You deliberately didn't copy me in just to set me up. Then eventually at 4:00 on a Monday, you forward me the email, then try to tell my boss you don't work on weekends. And my boss asked you, but why are you only sending this to Toya at 4 p.m? If you don't work weekends, fair enough, but you saw it on Monday. And actually, even if you haven't forwarded it to Toya, at the very least, because of the gravity of the contents of this email, you should have escalated it to my boss. And my boss knew almost immediately it was a setup job. So in trying to set me up, he showed his hands that inadvertently got him into trouble. And I remember Caroline, because she was supporting me on one of the contracts. She was like, Toya, I can't believe this happened. She was really upset, really annoyed. And I said, no. Take the emotion out of it, because emotion is what's causing Gary to spiral to the point where now, if he just didn't tell me about the escalation, I wouldn't have known. But he was so committed to set me up that in sending me that email, he actually inadvertently set himself up. And what has happened since then is I've always dealt with Gary with clean hands, because I know he's going to be his own undoing. Anybody that operates in the workplace from a place of emotion, you are always going to get it wrong. Is it the emails or the Teams messages that Gary sent to me expressing his anger and annoyance that I hadn't consulted him before I delegated work to a new member of staff? The privilege and the misogyny of it all stinks of shit. He wrote all his emotions and everything there. Every time this man is emotional, he does something that gets him into trouble. I'll be damned if it's going to be me that gets him out of his job. No. It's going to be him with his own hands. Remember I told you about that guy? Earlier episodes, the guy called Christopher. Do you remember I told you about him? He come in with big dick energy, swinging himself around. What happened? The man didn't last 2 months. One day he disappeared. My boss got rid of him. When you come for the anointed ones, the ones that are anointed by the blood of Jesus, when you come for black women who are covered in the blood of Jesus Christ, believe me, God said vengeance is his, and it's his vengeance that he seeks. Whatever religion you believe in, and for me, I'm not heavily religious like that. I'm very spiritual, but I believe in energies. If you put out good energy, you put out that good karma will visit you. And I'm telling you, the ancestors will take care of the rest. And some of you may be thinking, yeah, but Toya, really? Really? No one who has ever done a bad mind to me has ever got away with it. Ever. It just may take time. It may take time, but it will happen. And this is why I keep telling people at work. This is why I keep telling my friends about people at work, sorry. You see what at work, if you step on my toes to a point where you are coming for my job, I don't have to do much. But I fight clean. I don't fight dirty. I fight clean. And you see, Gary and Clive are on my hit list. They are on my hit list. Yeah, my spiritual hit list. I've reported them to God. I've already reported them. So everything that is happening with Gary has been a slow and steady. But he has been his own undoing. And one of the casualties now is Ian. And Ian is a byproduct. I think my boss not renewing Ian's contract is for her setting the tone for Gary, but Gary's not receiving the message that my boss is communicating, so he will have to feel it another way. My boss has already told Caroline, because Caroline told me that she's going to now look at playing to Gary's strengths. Do you know when someone says I need to play to someone's strengths, I always ask, what about the weaknesses? Do you know how patronising, condescending it is for someone to say, I'm going to play to your strengths? That means that you don't have very many of them, but the ones that you have, they will have to give special attention to. My boss has said she needs to play to Gary's strengths, and I can tell you now, the only strength he has is in his body odour, because that is probably strong. That's about it. Let's move on. So, in my organisation, I was approached recently if I would do shortlisting of permanent vacancies. I'm a consultant, so obviously my contract comes to an end later on in the year. But they're hiring staff, and they asked me if I would do some of the shortlisting and subsequently the interviews. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the interviews, and then I'm going to do a separate episode on the CVs. And I know it's a little back to front, but there's a reason for it. One, because I'm doing the interviews at the moment, so it's very fresh in my mind. And the CVs element of it, I want to develop that episode a little bit more, because it's more than just CVs. It's about a lot of the pre-screening checks and stuff, and things that we do in our lives as young, when we're young, that actually affect us when we're older, and things that we're doing when we're older that are affecting potential job opportunities for us. And no one ever had that chat with me, so I want to have that chat with you in a couple of weeks' time. At the moment, that episode will be called "Your CV is Not Cutting It." It may change slightly, but I think it's important that we talk about the CV. And obviously, I've got the CV masterclass, which will also accompany that episode. So once the episode is published, your next step should be to go and get the CV masterclass. But in a couple of weeks' time, we will explore a lot in that episode. But from an interview perspective, do you know what I found really interesting? Do you know the weaponisation of white women's tears and that white fragility? I really saw it in action today. So there was a candidate called Katie, and all we had, I didn't have Katie's CV or anything, so she had already been shortlisted at the shortlisting stage. Now, at shortlisting stage, it was all, they removed the names and they just had the candidate number. So there was quite a lot of people that shortlisted, so she could have come through from any one of us lot, right? So get on the call, and we have some structured questions that we need to ask. But I know very well that structured questions are good, but there are other questions that I quite like to ask that will maybe draw out information that is not very clear in some of the examples that candidates are given. Now, I've done interviews before. I've done CV shortlisting. I've recruited for teams before and set up teams and set up commercial contract functions. So I know what I'm looking for particular roles that sit within the contract management space or the commercial space. So Katie joins the call and everything, and she goes, "Oh, I'm just so nervous. Oh, I'm so nervous." And I was like, "Okay, just relax. I get it. It's an interview setting." And she goes, "Oh, it's remote working." So she spent about a good 3 minutes complaining about remote interviewing. And as she was giving examples to some of the questions I had asked her, I asked her, "You said that you're working at the moment." She said, "Yeah." I said, "So are you remote working?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "So how long have you been remote working for?" And she said, "Oh, about a year." I said, "So why are you finding it such a challenge, aside from it being an interview? And the nervousness that's sometimes attributed to interviewing, why are you finding remote interviews like a challenge? Because you've been working remotely anyway, so really it should give you an advantage." And she almost looked shocked. And I think what was pissing me off is, why is it that white women are so, they're always tapping in their fragility as a way to kind of elicit emotion to give them a pass? And for me, I just kind of felt like, your fragility is not going to make your interview any easier. I'm not going to give you extra points for fragility. I'm not feeling sorry for you. Do you understand? You put yourself through an interview process. You knew that you were going to go for an interview. You knew the interviews were going to be remote. You've been working remote for a year. So really and truly, you should understand the nuances of remote interviews and remote working. So it was me and another man that were doing the interviews, and this particular man that was on my panel, he was my sifting partner. So we had to agree, we had to give scoring. So we had to agree scoring. So I've worked with him before, and we got on really, really well. And actually, we think quite similarly. And he's a lot older than me, and he will tell you I'm a lot younger than him. Anyway, so I just kind of, it made her fragility, Katie's fragility, made me uncomfortable, because I didn't understand why it was present in an interview that, to be honest, was quite relaxed. Because the person on my panel is quite a relaxing person. He led it, so he was the lead, and I thought it would be better for him to be that way. Because I'm quite straight talking, it can come across as quite harsh if you don't know me. So I don't think that necessarily I should lead. But in a way, I was leading, because it was me that was asking the over and above questions. And she was giving me very flaky answers. And I made a recommendation that there was a entry level role that, because she had applied for a junior level role, and actually I made the recommendation that I'm quite happy for them to give her a job offer, but it has to be for an entry level role, because if she is feeling so challenged by remote working, then I think that she's going to need extra support. So the expectations that would be placed on a junior level role would probably be too much for her. And when I said that to my panel member, he actually agreed 100% with me. He was like, I agree. He goes, it was really weird. But for me, it wasn't weird. I felt like this woman had come to interview. She's seen a black woman, who is me, and a older white gentleman. And she probably thought, right, I'm going to appeal to my fragility as a way to elicit emotion so they can... And it was very much like that. And it was just so weird. And then, as we're interviewing her, I see something jump in the air, and it was her cat. Oh, come here, pussy, pussy. That's what she said. That's what she said on a remote interview. Oh, come down, pussy. She goes, oh, he could just pick up my energy. He can tell that I'm in an interview. He's a fucking cat. He's probably hungry. He's probably hungry. Or he's probably heard you whining. So he wants to check why you're fucking crying. And I just thought to myself, where's the professionalism here? Why is it that white women who always tap in their fragility feel like processes and procedures don't apply to them? And if it does apply to them, they want to get almost the easier end of it, because I'm so this fragile, and I'm not there. And luckily for me, my panel member agreed, because if we was on polar opposite sides, I'd probably still be having the catch-ups with him at the end. So at the end of every interview we have catch-ups. I'd probably still be doing a catch-up, because we have to agree on the scores. We have to. So I recommended that she be offered probably an entry level, and that she needs some support. But she has relatively good experience to be able to do the role. But it's about whether she's confident enough to do it. So that was quite strange. Of all the interviews I've done, it was like she came in with a flashing light of white fragility. And that really rubbed me up the wrong way. It pissed me off. Because I interviewed many people today, right? From different backgrounds, different races. But what was consistent is the white women were always appealing to the fragility that exists with them. That is part and parcel of their existence. Whereas the black women, the Asian women, and those who are considered ethnic minority women, they were very composed, very professional, and it's almost like we as black people understand that we're measured to a different standard. So because we know we're measured to a different standard, we come to an interview often even over prepared, because we know that the measurement of passing is higher, where a white woman can use fragility as her pass mark or as her benchmark. As a black woman, or as anyone who is considered ethnic minority, we don't have that pass mark. And the black women during the interview process were fantastic, because they understood that if I'm asking you to give me an example where you have shown management skills, they're telling me what management skills are, how they showed that, and the output of that. It was I definitely felt that. And I think it's because, as I've said, we know that there is more required from us. Therefore, we can't rely on emotion, or we can't rely on appealing to an interviewer's nature, because we know that white people in general who are upholding the oppressive structures dehumanize black women. They don't associate emotion with us. So we don't have the ability to appeal to an emotion that within white people they don't believe that we have. So we know what we have to appeal to is experience, or the ability to overachieve, or the blood, sweat and tears we've sacrificed to get to a point where at an interview we have a lot of experiences within the workplace of where we have had to go over and above, because that is part and parcel of a black woman's existence, doing over and above just to be recognised, over and above to be considered. Do you understand? Whereas white people don't ever have that nuance. Everything is easy. So you could be in an interview and your cat could jump on your lap and you're like, oh, pussy, pussy. But a black person will never, ever be in that situation and someone saying, it'd be like, oh, that's unprofessional. The margin of error is very, very tight for black women than it is for white women. And that is on period. And I definitely felt like, whenever I do an interview, I'm always fair, I'm always concise, and I'm always observant. Always. There was one white woman, and you can tell that she's been in the industry for a long time, because her examples were different, but her examples were still laced with fragility, because it was always like, I was downtrodden and I was defeated and then I had to rise like a phoenix. It's all of that shit. Whereas I just think, and I speak specifically as a black woman, we know what it is to kind of have to multitask, or where our job is harder and we're not getting that support. So we have had to make the sacrifices to be able to have the examples that we can now bring into an interview. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So when I'm talking to my black queens, I'm saying to you that already we have an advantage over the white constructs, and we have an advantage because we are never given the easy way out. Yeah, we're never given the easy way out. We have to overachieve. We have to make sacrifices just to be seen. And that means that we already have the experience of, or we have the experience to be able to do, whereas our white counterparts don't actually have that. Gary is a classic example of that. He has never had to be a commercial contract manager before. That's why he can't do the job. He relies on his white masculinity. I don't even know if you'd call it masculinity, because he's just a dick. But all he has to rely on is his white passport. That is his skin colour. And he's managed to find himself in this organisation. He's found himself at this job, but he can't do the job. But he'll manipulate Ian to do the job for him. And one may say, well, maybe he's smart. Well, not really, because Ian's contract's not being renewed. And what's actually going to happen is he'll be on the spotlight and he will not be able to deliver. But he's managed to get into that role. God knows how much his day rate is. Do you understand? But black people don't get that opportunity. As a black woman, I don't get the opportunity to drop the ball. I don't get the opportunity where I could just be haphazard with my job, or not be a safe pair of hands, or just do the basics. I don't have that. I know that I have to deliver every single day. That's often when I'm like, oh, I'm really tired at work today. That's because I've had to fucking deliver. I've had to deliver. I don't get any passes. White people have passes. And it's being white. And for white women, it's fragility as well. That is, if you want me to be quite honest with you, it's actually quite disturbing that white fragility holds so much weight that once it's displayed, it's meant to disarm you, and then you just let them pass, or just don't even scrutinise it. You just kind of give them that pass. It's just very bizarre. Whereas for me, I've just decided, not just decided, but I always decide this when going into an interview, is I'm going to take people on their merits, right? But if I identify the display of, or an inkling of that proximity to tap in the white privilege, I'm not going to allow that to go through to the next round. No. You have to bring something of substance to the table, because your whiteness isn't going to get the job done. In fact, what your whiteness is going to do is continue to uphold the racist structures that could seek to oppress black people, because what you will then do is find yourself in a position with Gary where you're setting up hard-working black people just because you feel like they shouldn't be there. That's some bullshit, and that's never going to run with me. That's not going to run with me. Listen, I'll say this, not all white women are like that, or not all white men are like that, but some are, and I know when they are, and I can identify them, and I'm not ashamed to say that on this podcast. But we have to, as black women, understand the advantages that we have, and I've said this to you before. Being underestimated is an advantage because they don't expect from us. And where they don't expect, we overachieve and we surpass the bar. So when you're going into your next interview, just understand that you have the advantage of being underlooked and overlooked. And when you go there to those interviews, then you've got to show up and show out. Do you understand? This is why I have the interview masterclass on the toytalks.com website. And I do talk about remote interviews and the remote interview etiquette. There is an etiquette your cat jumping on your lap is not professional. Yeah? It's not professional. Honestly, I definitely think that, you know, it's weird because when they were prepping us to do the interview panel, they were talking about unconscious bias. So they were saying that sometimes you can look at, you know, if people don't put backgrounds, and you could look at their houses and then you could have unconscious bias. And in my head, I was thinking that doesn't apply to someone like me. Should I tell you why? Because I came from the gutter. So I don't look at people and then have that bias. I just don't. But white people do. Because they think they're better than us, right? So they look down their nose. I actually don't. And actually, I find it telling that they had to make a point of doing... So we had like 10 minutes of unconscious bias training because, number one, I don't think the training can be done in 10 minutes. Number two, I think that unconscious bias depends on your background. It does depend on your background. It depends on where you've come from. You know, I don't... You know, a lot of... Actually, all of the interviews I had, they never had any backgrounds up or anything. But I was too busy, you know, interacting and asking those interview questions, trying to find the right candidate, rather than looking at their background to see if they've got curtains or blinds. Like, I don't give a shit. There was one interview panel that I had on, and this interview panel member, I've never met him before, so he put time in my diary for 10 minutes because he wanted to meet me. It was weird. Then he says, "Oh, how do you pronounce your name?" So what the fuck? So I told him. I goes, it sounds how it looks. He goes, yeah, but it can be difficult for an Englishman. And I said, so I should make it easy for an Englishman by saying my name so that you don't have to. And he just stopped. He didn't know what to say to me. And in my head I was like, what a fucking turd. And then he started asking me about my background because he works in a different department. By the time I told him what my background was, you could see that he had started having sloping shoulders because he was bringing high shoulders to come and talk to me. And again, it's being underestimated, isn't it? He must have saw my name and thought, oh, let me suss her out. I'll put him in her place. I'll tell her, I'll do the scoring. You'll agree with me. No, that's not how it works. Because when the candidate was asking commercial contract manager questions, he couldn't answer. He asked, oh, I'll defer to my learned colleague. Yes, I am learned, dickhead. That hole that he has in the middle of his head, where the hair is receding, is because he's rude. So his hair is disrespecting him. He has one big circle, come like Prince William. Yeah? Because he's too fucking rude. White people need to wake up and smell the roses. Because when you continue to oppress people, there will come a point where they will no longer be oppressed again. And what is happening is, as black women, we're cluing ourselves up. There are platforms like Toya Talks, like Say Your Mind's podcast as well by Kelechi Okafor. We've got so many... we have so many sources of information. So I definitely feel like a change is definitely coming. And where you have knowledge, you have power. Facts. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room. But what you need to be is in the room. You need to be in the room. And the only way you're going to be in those rooms is if you pass those interviews. And this is why I keep saying to everybody, yes, I've got the CV Masterclass. And the CV Masterclass is brilliant. Anyone who has purchased it will always testify. It is brilliant. Then once you get the interview, and once you get your CV shortlisted, you're invited to interview. How are you going to conduct those interviews? And I thought about it. That's why I've done the masterclasses in the way I've done them. So that you've got the beginning, the CV, you got the interview, you got the negotiation, and then you also got the redundancy, because that could be a reality for some people as well. So let us really take heed of why these masterclasses exist, because I didn't just create them for the sake of it. I created them to support the podcast, because we're all at different stages of our career. We're all at very different stages. And I'm sitting here comfortably telling you there is no way you can look at my CV and you're not inviting me for interview. It's not possible. You have to. I give you no reason to not invite me to interview. You're forced. Your conscience won't allow you, because I know how I represent myself in my CV. Now, all I have to do is get into an interview setting and bring that CV to life. And that's what I teach you in the masterclass. Don't ever get it twisted. I've gone to interviews before and I've got brain freeze. And I tell them, you know, some people say, oh, I want to talk about my hobbies on my CV. No one gives a shit about your hobbies. If you want to show parts of your personality, wait until an interview to do that. Oh my God, guys, I've had a brain freeze. You can tell I haven't had my coffee, can't you? Ha 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 ha. You know, you people always laughing. Tea, coffee and crumpets. Always. Everybody will laugh. By the time they finish laughing, I've already found my chain of thought again. You know, you have to develop techniques. And you've got to remember, if you're going to work in oppressive structures, you have to know how to navigate those structures so you limit its oppressiveness. And I'm going to tell you right now, where I work, I do not feel oppressed. What I do feel is targeted by certain people because I'm a woman, one, and because I'm a black woman. Definitely. I definitely do. And I front it, but better believe them burn folders are healthy. I'm just waiting for the opportunity. Everybody has a limit. And as soon as I reach my limit, I will invite my madness to the office. And what that will entail will be a nice, scrumptiously healthy email with attachments with my boss on CC to human resources. I don't play games. And the way I write, listen, if you see the way I write emails at work, I've really studied white people and how they use professionally emotive language to insinuate one thing, but to say completely another. It is a skill. Sometimes, you know, some of your managers, look at the way they write things and start being a student of these oppressors. These attempted oppressors. Start being a student and watch them. If I write email here, let me give you an example. They approached me to do the short listing. They didn't approach me at that same time to do the interviews. When I done the shortlisting, they saw how I did it. I did it really, really well. I know my stuff. They said, okay, we need you. Do you know that they put 18 interviews in my diary for this week? I sent them an email. I said, hi. I have seen it as a complete honour to be able to welcome in the next batch of junior commercial contract consultants or commercial contract managers or whatever the title is. However, I have done this on a voluntary basis because I believe in sowing into the next generation. However, in doing so, I have to also use my voice when things get too much. In December, I almost walked away from this project because of the pressure. I stayed because I want to see this project to the end. However, you have put in 18 individual interviews into my diary. And I think that we're forgetting that I also have a day job to deliver, that the organisation pays me a day rate. And I am a senior lead for these contracts. These are considered high profile, controversial contracts. Therefore, it is inconceivable for me to be able to do, attend or perform 18 interviews. 5 minutes. They said, please, Toy, decline the ones you don't want. We'll find somebody else. Because they were trying to say any interview you can't do, you have to find someone to replace you. That's not my job. I don't work in HR. That is HR's job. They're a lazy bunch of so-and-sos. Do your own job. They said, oh, if we can't find someone to replace you, we'll let you know. I didn't even respond because letting me know don't mean shit because I ain't doing it. They're advantage takers because I'm good at something. For now, you want to overload me, but you're not paying me extra money to do the interviews, are you? It's not part of my job. After all, I'm just a consultant. I work through my limited company. I shouldn't even be doing this. But I know that number one, I'm sowing into the next generation. Number two, human resources, listen, they pattern me, you know. They know me there and they know I do a good job. They want me to go perm. By all means, these people want me to go perm and I refuse. I know for a fact, if I was to leave tomorrow, I have at least 10 people in human resources that I could use as a reference. You know, sometimes when you leave and you need a reference, it will take 1 month. Not here. No, not when they hear me. No. Because they know me. I'm a good person and I position myself as somebody who's approachable, they know they can come to me with stuff, but don't take the piss out of me. 18 interviews. Do I work in human resources, please? But can you see how I structured that email? Do you remember I was telling you guys about Clive? Clive will be his own undoing. You see that man? He's a bully. He is a bully. He is horrible. And our new colleague, Caroline, had a run-in with him today. Unfortunately, I didn't catch up with her to find out what happened. But for her to tell me she had a run-in with him, believe me, he did something to her, because she's not like that. She's still new. You can see that she's still scoping out the place. This is Clive that tried to humiliate me on a Teams call of 20 people by comparing me to Gary. Do you remember I told you? And another senior member of staff stopped him and halted him on his tracks. Just gave him one washing down. Really had my back, eh? But you see that Clive, the way I looked at him, I was raining curses upon his head in my mind. Yeah. Do you know, Clive has been harassing me for 2 weeks to get approval for something from one of my suppliers. But my supplier gave approval before, but will not give approval again. And there's nothing contractually binding them to give approval for a second time. I've asked the question, I've pushed, I've used my commercial skills to try and convince them. But actually, I personally don't agree with the supplier agreeing to it. So I'm actually commercially siding with the supplier, to be honest. Do you know that when I asked the supplier again, they gave me justification, but it was a no? Do you know that when I sent Clive an email, I copied in one of the other consultants that's helping me with this supplier on a project? This colleague of mine, we work really well together. But this particular project is huge. So he feeds into that project. And anytime I'm maybe taking a day off, I know this guy will cover me. So when I send an email to Clive to say, unfortunately, the supplier said no, I copied in that my colleague. You people think I'm stupid. I copied in my colleague because I wanted a witness to what was about to happen. Because one thing is with misogynistic pigs, they will always show their hand. Because they can't help it. They're so arrogant in their misogynoir. So they have to show it. They want to put you in your place, and they want to do the whole humiliation thing. Listen, you see me, my tolerance in my workplace is high enough to allow you to cause yourself a problem and for me to collect it in the burn folder, so that when I'm ready to launch on you, and it will be uncontested that there is a pattern of discrimination. He does it because I'm a woman, and he does it because I'm a black woman. But I know it's harder to prove that he's doing what he's doing because I'm a black woman. But it's easier to prove, based on the evidence I've collated, it's easier to prove that it's because I'm a woman. So when I sent Clive that email, he sent me one back. He goes, you have to push harder. That's what he wrote there, and in capitals. When somebody writes in capitals, they're shouting. That's what I'm telling you. My colleague called me. He said, Toya, what's this email that Clive is sending? Who does he think he is? My colleague was vexed, and I was happy about it. I was happy about it because I said to myself, this Clive, I've already had one senior colleague fight for me. I've got my colleague now. You will fight for me. My colleague said, no, I'm not having this. Toya, you work too hard to deal with this shit. I'm going to sort it out now. My colleague wrote him an email. Toya and I have worked hours on end on this particular contract. The supplier, everything Toya has said in regards to the contractual arrangement with the supplier stands. We will not be asking the supplier for this anymore because the supplier said no. And actually, there's nothing contractually binding that supplier, as Toya has rightly said. This has to be the end of this request. Do you know what Clive wrote back? I rest my case, ... I will let it be. Then he got his colleague to write also. His colleague said, we will back off now. Listen, those were the sweetest emails I received from Clive and his colleague. Because you know where that went? In the burn folder. Then I emailed my colleague, took Clive and the other one out, and I said to my colleague, it's really telling that he rests his case because I have definitely felt like I'm on trial. And I definitely feel as though they have come to me and they have ganged up to harass me, and they have disrespected my commercial position by continuously attempting to make me feel harassed. And it's taken a man of your caliber to tell them what I have already told them. The only difference between you and I is that you are a man and I am a woman. So my question is, do you rest your case because a man has told you the same thing that I have said? And you will now back off because a man has told you the same thing I have. My colleague wrote back to me, I concur with you, Toya. Do you know what I did? I put it in a burn folder. I'm patient. I'm creating an audit trail. Listen, I don't tell you guys to do things I don't do. I tell you to do the things that I know that have benefited me. You're probably thinking, but Toya, at what point are you going to use it? When he does something that is so disrespectful to the point that it compromises my job, I'm going to take everything from that burn folder. You know what I'm going to do? I will email his boss with a formal complaint. I will even put Clive on CC. I will put the HR business partner and my boss. And before I do those things, I will call my boss and tell her what I'm about to do, and I will do it. Then I will put the attachments in a zip folder so that when they're zipping it down, it will explode with all the evidence. I'm patient enough when it comes to racist white men, racist white people. I'm patient because I understand the way they operate. Because if you go with one example, they'll tell you, oh, their shower wasn't working at home, so they were stressed. Oh, their dog is in hospital because it chewed on a chicken bone. I don't want to hear no excuses. So I'm patient enough to wait for a culmination of a pattern. Because when there is a pattern, that means there's more than one example. I have a total of 15 examples. 15 examples. I want you to tell me that that ain't a pattern. And that's 15 examples across a period of 3 months. Across a period of 3 months. And now he's already pissed off another colleague of mine. And that colleague went to my boss. What does that show you? Pattern. So I'm able to reference what happened to my colleague, who also happens to be a black woman. So yes, I am going to put forward the notion that it's racial discrimination, because I'm telling you now it is. It is because we are black. I 100% know it. But I know it's harder to prove. It's really weird, isn't it? When something happens like that and you say it's because I'm a woman, because I'm black, people are likely to accept the sex discrimination rather than the race, because they can't identify with the race, especially if you are reporting it to HR who are dominantly white. It's a bit strange, because I know that in this case it works hand in hand. If I was a white woman, he would deal with me different. He would still be an arrogant, pompous prat, but he'd be less disrespectful. But I am a woman and I'm black, and I think it grates on the foundation of who he is. Because my commercial view has a lot of weight and sway, and he knows it and he hates it. He knows it and he hates it. And I'm going to be honest with you with something. I don't take any pleasure out of making formal complaints to human resources, but I take pleasure in it if it makes me more comfortable to do my job. But you guys have to understand that sometimes you have to play that long game a little bit. And that long game can sometimes be uncomfortable. But if it means that you have a desired result that is then achieved at the end of that long game, isn't it worth it? Because for me, at the end of that long game, I want him removed from the project. I want him out. And they will get rid of him. And they'll get rid of him because they have this massive thing about, protecting women in my workplace, that they really, it's a big thing in my workplace. They take it seriously. Less so the race discrimination, because the people that sit in human resources, none of them are black. So when you're telling them about race discrimination, it's almost like you have to try and convince them. And remember, these are people that who have enjoyed privilege. They're never really going to understand that. They're going to question whether you're really experiencing that, because they don't know what that looks like, because they've never had to. And my thing is, as long as I put it down on paper, whether they choose to accept it or not, I've made the complaint. They have to prove that it isn't, right? Guys and girls, this is what one is dealing with in the workplace. But I'm hoping that you guys have picked some nuggets out of what I'm saying here. I had a young lady reach out to me. Her organisation has basically brought out a remote workplace attire policy. And this policy basically stipulates what they believe is professional attire for remote working. So this young lady sent me an email and she says, Toya, I desperately need your help because I do not know what to do with this. And they've sent this and they've basically said to us, it's a policy. So I said to her, send me the policy. She sent me the policy. I said, this is discrimination. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, first of all, it's economic discrimination as well, because they're assuming that you have the funds to be able to dress in the attire that they've prescribed. So I also want to read the letter that she sent to her organisation. And she gave them 7 working days to respond. And within 3 days, they responded. And actually, they've retracted the policy. And they sent out an email to everybody. Yeah, because your audience that you decided to disrespect, you need to go back to them. Your employees that you disrespected in coming out of this policy, you had to retract it and go back to them and tell them that you're no longer doing this policy. And it was purely based on this girl. Now, there is a couple of things I want to cover off, but I just want to read the email I sent. Dear Clive. So Clive is the HR business partner who is also actually the director of HR as well. Dear Clive, I have received, of course, the policy for remote working attire. And to be honest with you, I found this very disturbing. Please find attached my job description. As you can see from my job description, my job is not client facing. However, in the event that my job is client facing or moves into a client facing role, it has to be appreciated that there is not a universal way to dress when working from home. By virtue of the fact that we are working from home, I do agree with you that wearing hoodies and things like that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate, but I don't think that there needs to be a policy to support how people dress. There is not a policy in regards to the organisation's duty of care to protect staff members with regards to mental health. But you have decided, or the organisation has decided to bring out a workplace policy on work attire. This would also insinuate that there is a work uniform. However, having worked for the organisation for 2 years, there is no workplace uniform. It is very divisive and often controlling to dictate to members of staff what to wear whilst remote working. In the same way, I wouldn't expect this organisation, and I read the organisation name, wouldn't tell me what to wear to work Monday to Friday if we were back in the old world of being in the office Monday to Friday. I find it mentally distressing and uncomfortable from an economic standpoint that an organisation of this magnitude would seek to control and manage what employees wear to work whilst remote working. This feels very discriminatory in nature. It was noted in last year's report of the pay disparity between men and women within this organisation. That would mean that only the men in this organisation would be able to benefit from the workplace work attire policy because they would be in a financial position to afford the prescribed work attire. Whereas me being a woman, unfortunately, I fall into the pay gap, and unfortunately I would not have the funds to keep up appearances. I would ask that this work attire policy be removed and withdrawn because it is not only discriminatory in nature, but it seeks to isolate members of staff who maybe can't afford the work attire prescribed by the organisation. I do also want to make clear that this policy is not accepted by me, and I would like this to be investigated, as I'd want to know what metrics and measurements were used to decide on what workplace attire or suitable workplace attire looks like. And I would also like to understand if this workplace attire extends to footwear, as I will be working remotely from home. Full stop. Kind regards. Yeah, that's what I dictated for this young lady to write. If you're going to start talking about workplace attire, yeah, we need to talk about footwear. You're going to tell this young girl what to wear on her feet. Within 3 days, they retracted it. Now, I said to this young lady, I said, you've got to be careful as well, you know. Because if this is the route that you decide to go down, it's going to ruffle feathers. This is a whole policy that probably got signed off by a few people. She said, Toya, I don't care. I've been there for 2 years. They should try to do anything. And she goes, Toya, the fact that I and a couple of members of staff have already complained about this. It's not just me. She goes, at the end of the day, it's not my fault they don't have the Toy Talks platform. I'm able to come to you and get that support, but other members of staff have complained, and I've seen their complaints. And I did say to her, make sure you get it in writing from them that they've complained, because what you don't want it to be is like you are the only person that's complained. So it's important that they understand that it's a collective, upset rather than just a subjective one. Anyway, like I said, within 3 days, they retracted the policy, and they did send her an email that is reminiscent of an apology, because you can't, don't get me wrong, I think you need to appeal to people's professionalism. Obviously, this girl's not in a client-facing role, but if she was in a client-facing role, she probably wouldn't wear a hoodie. But if she did, she's in her home. She's in her home. It's not like she's got a flipping bandana across her head. Do you understand? I just think that organisations are itching to get back in the office to continue the micromanagement and the oppression that they have been able to utilise and exist in as a form of control. That's all it is. But I really do think that this pandemic has realigned everybody's positioning, and you have to also realign your positioning too. Organisations don't yield the type of power they thought they did. Employees are allowed to challenge certain things now. It's just the way you do it. It's the way you do it. And I always say to people, what is your desired outcome? What are you trying to get out of it here? And she said, Toya, they haven't given me a pay rise in 2 years that I've been here, and they're telling me about work attire. So what? I need to go and buy a special shirt? It's also about picking your battles. 100%. And I said this to her. I said, this could put you on their target list. And she goes, Toya, it can't, because I've got a whole burn folder for them, which I did start laughing. But I was really, really, really happy that, number one, I was able to help this Black Queen. But number two, that she believed me to be a safe pair of hands to be able to help her. And she was so ecstatic when they withdrew the policy. She sent me a beautiful email. I could definitely feel that this policy was weighing quite heavily on her. And, it's hard enough for people to work remotely without you giving them rules of engagement. You can't do things like that. People are literally working remotely because there is a virus that is killing people. People haven't decided to work from home because they can't bother to go to the office. And it's that compassion that organisations just don't have, and they are making all these blunders. And it doesn't look good, does it? When an organisation has a whole policy that you send to a global organisation, and then you send an email retracting it. And do you know what I'm actually going to do? Is I'm going to actually ask, well, actually probably not. I was going to ask her for a copy of the retraction, but if I was to read it on here, you'd probably figure out the company. But that's a big deal as well. And I said to her, the retraction she needs to put in her burn folder, because they wouldn't retract something that they could defend in a court of an employment tribunal. They wouldn't retract something that they could defend in an employment tribunal. So they definitely knew that was skirting on the edge of what was acceptable. So that's why they've done it. So guys, listen, I wanted to share that with you. And also just the power of this English language. Oyobo people have really taught me some hard lessons. So a lot of you, you guys DM me or you send me messages like, how do I know what to do? Sometimes I don't. I've just kind of figured out how organisations tick and how human resources tick, and actually white people in general, how they operate in the world of work. And I have been burnt so many times in my ignorance in my younger years that in my adult years, I have used all those experiences to teach you guys. I want you guys to be better than me. I don't want you guys to walk through the treacherous jungle of the world of work. Why do you have to have those same scars as I do? I love the fact that you guys are able to write in with your dilemmas. I love the fact that you guys are able to kind of learn from each other's dilemmas as well. And I love the fact that you guys are confident in your approach to the world of work, because sometimes what you need is just, maybe a reassuring voice. And if that's what I am, I'm so blessed and grateful to be that. We are no longer accepting crumbs as Black women. It's not going to happen. We're not going to accept those crumbs. Success is ours too. We're entitled to have success when we've made the sacrifice to be able to have the proximity to success. Do you understand? It's ours for the taking. And I'm really proud of the way the Toy Talks platform continues to support you all globally, not just in the UK, not just domestically, but globally. And I thank each and every one of you for always supporting, always listening in. You guys support this podcast, and you know what? I never knew how popular this podcast would be. I just knew that I needed to do a podcast because capturing everything on Snapchat only lasted 24 hours, and there needed to be a central hub where all this is kept so that you guys can come back to previous episodes, you guys can refer back, you guys can hear kind of the live things that I'm going through and navigating, and you guys can hear each other's dilemmas. And if I'm able to create this weekly and consistently, I know, and I always knew that this would be great, but it's beyond my wildest dreams that I'd be sitting here saying in 2020 this podcast charted top 50 for 2020 on Spotify playlists. Like, that's crazy. But I know that this is a much needed platform, and for me, I'm not here to sell you guys fantasy. I'm always going to give it to you in its rawest form, because I know if I tell you the truth in its rawest form and equip you with the tools, if I'm not there, you're able to attain success, you're able to navigate. Because the nuance of being black and a woman in the workplace for us is very real for us. And our experiences in the world of work is very different for us. And this is why I will always, with my chest and my high shoulders, tell everybody the Toya Talks podcast and the Toya Talks platform is 2 black women, for black women, about black women, by a black woman, created by a black woman, for black women, period. So listen, I'm going to draw this episode to a close. As always, I've enjoyed delivering it to you, and I want to thank you for joining me each and every week, as you do so diligently, to listen to a new episode of the Toy Talks podcast. You guys, I'm so excited because the next few episodes are going to be really excited. I have a special guest. Yeah, I've got a special guest joining within the next week or so. And I will be doing a Clubhouse. You guys know, if you don't know already, I have a room on Clubhouse called Toya Talks. And what I'm planning to do is maybe once every week or bi-weekly, I will take one of the episodes from the Toya Talks podcast, past and present, and we'll create a room and we'll just talk, and it'll give you opportunity to recap on previous episodes, give you an opportunity to ask me questions. And I know that, you know, when you're listening to podcasts, you're probably thinking about questions or asking certain things, and being able to go on Clubhouse, create a room where we can have this conversation is brilliant. I hosted a room on Saturday past, on the I think, what was Saturday? I think it was the 20th of March, called Poverty Mindset, and that room was absolutely fantastic. It was co-hosted by one of my friends. It was an amazing room. We spoke, we shared, we chopped it up. It was amazing, and I definitely will be doing that on a bi-weekly basis. So if you are on Clubhouse, make sure you follow me. The room is Toya Talks, and my name on Clubhouse is Toya Washington, which is all one word. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram. My personal Instagram is Toya_Washington. The Toya Talks podcast Instagram page is Toya_Talks. Follow me on Snapchat, Toya Washington, all one word, or on Twitter, Toya_W with a hashtag Toya Talks. And of course, I am on Clubhouse, Toya Washington, all one word. And of course, follow the room, or the club, sorry, that is Toya Talks. If you want to keep abreast of everything Toya Talks related, make sure you go on the website, toyatalks.com. And of course, if you have a workplace dilemma, do not be shy. I will protect your anonymity. Keep it succinct, straight to the point, and email hello@toyatalks.com. So, drawing it to a close, I've really enjoyed delivering this. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have an amazing week, and make sure that you stay true to yourself. If there is anybody that you know that will benefit from the Toya Talks podcast, send them a link. If there is a particular episode that you've listened to and you think this person will really benefit, send them the link. All the episodes come with a summary description. So you're able to look at the summary description and decipher if that's an episode that you want to listen to, if you are new, or if you want to start from the beginning. Definitely, I would always say start from the beginning of the Toy Talks podcast and come on this journey with us. I'm going to draw this episode to a close. Thank you again, and I'll see you guys again next week for another episode. My name is Toy Washington, and you have been listening to the Toy Talks podcast.